The chandelier above the grand pavilion sparkled like a crown over my family's delusion. Waiters floated by carrying trays of foie gras and truffle risotto, the finest offerings for the 65th birthday of Henry Blake, my father, real estate mogul and patriarch of the Blake dynasty. I, however, sat at a table tucked behind a column, nearly out of sight. "Vanessa," my mother said, casting a glance that barely disguised her disappointment, "at least try to look presentable. The Langfords are here." I smoothed the lapel of my dove gray blazer, Italian wool, minimalist cut, custom fit. Understated, but tailored. Not that she'd know the difference. Her pearls rattled as she shifted in her seat. "I am presentable," I said. "That's the problem," chimed in my brother, Andrew, smirking over his wine. "You've been present, not impressive." His laughter was met with polite chuckles from our cousins, the sycophantic hangers-on. I let them have their moment. Let them gloat. If only they knew. My phone buzzed beneath the tablecloth. Transfer confirmed. Hawthorne Plaza ownership deed executed. Buyer, V. Holdings. Value, $380 million. A smile tugged at my lips. Hawthorne Plaza was the flagship property of Blake & Company. Real estate, our family's crown jewel, or at least, it used to be. I took a polite sip of water and glanced across the room at the head table. Dad was mid-toast, extolling Andrew's latest, brilliant, acquisition. Apparently, a rundown complex in Midtown that he was over-leveraged on. My father praised it like it was the Rockefeller Center. A toast, he declared, raising his glass, to the future of Blake & Company. With Andrew at the helm, we're just getting started. Applause erupted. I tapped my phone again. Incoming doc. Blake Tower title transfer processing, completion ETA, 8:45 p.m. It was 8:20 p.m. I swirled the cold carrot bisque in my bowl, untouched. It was appropriate, my entire childhood had been cold plates and colder shoulders. Being the daughter who refused to beg for a junior position at the firm. Who dared to leave and waste her Ivy League degree on managing rundown rental units. Andrew once called my first property investment a glorified food truck graveyard. That graveyard now held the Elara Residences, Manhattan's most luxurious penthouse tower. I'd flipped it for $190 million. "Vanessa," my mother said, brushing invisible lint from her designer dress, "how's your little rental company these days?" I smiled sweetly. "Growing. 2 properties now." Andrew chuckled. 3 if you count that warehouse in Soho. Or was that condemned? That warehouse now held a Michelin-starred restaurant, 2 designer boutiques, and a corporate headquarters for one of the fastest-growing AI startups in the country. All tenants of V. Holdings. My phone buzzed again. Final notice. Press release scheduled for 9 p.m. EST. Headline. Blake Tower sold. Buyer. Vanessa Blake, CEO of V. Holdings. I looked at the clock. 8:30. As they cut into their $400 Wagyu and clinked glasses over imaginary success, I stayed quiet, calculating. "Honestly," Andrew said, cutting into his steak, "if you'd ever taken real estate seriously, you could have at least made something of yourself. Instead of flipping parking lots and pretending you own things." I cleared my throat. "Funny you mention that. The Langford lot you were eyeing last month. Not for sale." "Oh, please," he scoffed. "And how would you know that?" "Because I bought it last week." The room stilled for half a second. Dad blinked. "That's a $200 million parcel." "215, I corrected. "It came with the building adjacent." My mother's grip on her fork tightened. My cousin Mallory froze mid-bite. Andrew's jaw twitched. "I'm sorry," Dad said, frowning. "You're saying, you personally purchased it?" "I did. Through one of my firms. We closed on Tuesday." I let the words linger. The silence they created was delicious. My phone buzzed again. Blake Tower transfer. Finalized. Public notice to go live at 9 p.m. 8:45. "I suppose," Dad muttered, reaching for his wine glass, "there's still a junior analyst position at the firm if you want to get serious." "No thank you," I said, checking the document labeled, "New lease agreement, Blake & Company. Real estate. Monthly rent. Tripled. Due immediately." They were about to learn exactly how serious I'd been. 8:55 p.m. 10 more minutes. I stared down into my bowl of untouched carrot bisque as my father droned on about legacy and power, pausing only to praise Andrew's business instincts and the Marshall Fund's quarterly gains. Around me, the table buzzed with chatter and toasts. But I was quiet, calm, waiting. "You've always had potential," my mother said, dabbing the corners of her mouth with a cloth napkin, "but you squandered it. These little buildings of yours. You could have done something meaningful with us. I did do something meaningful, I said, glancing at my phone. 9 p.m. Breaking. Blake Tower sold to private buyer. New owner revealed, Vanessa Blake of V. Holdings. $400 million deal finalized. Blake & Company, now a tenant in former HQ. Right on time. Andrew's phone lit up first. He looked down mid-sip of wine, eyes narrowing. What the hell? One by one, phones buzzed at the table. Screens flashed in unison like a firework show of disbelief. What is this? My father barked, grabbing his own phone. His face turned the color of old bricks. This has to be a mistake. No mistake, I said softly, finally taking a spoonful of my now lukewarm soup. I own Blake Tower. Silence. Stunning, expansive silence. Andrew's jaw clenched as he scrolled. V. Holdings, that's you, I nodded, savoring my soup. But, Blake & Company owns. Used to own, I corrected. You now lease the building. From me. No, that's impossible, Dad said, rising slightly in his chair. We never sold the tower. Your legal team did, I replied. 3 shell companies, all perfectly legal. All under my umbrella. My phone buzzed again. Updated lease agreement. Effective immediately. Rent increase x3. Removal of Blake branding from tower. Scheduled 10 p.m. You tricked us. Andrew hissed, voice a low growl. No, you ignored me, I said, setting my spoon down gently. You were too busy calling me a failure to check who was buying up the city under your nose. Cousin Mallory's fork clattered to her plate. My mother's pearls strained against her throat. Dad's hand trembled as he grabbed a napkin. You bought the tower where our firm started. Where I built everything. You think this is funny? No, I said, I think it's necessary. A waiter approached, setting down fresh documents beside my father. From Ms. Blake, the waiter said with a nod. Updated lease terms. Triple rent. Office reassignment. Signage removal. Andrew lunged for the papers like they were about to vanish. He flipped through them with a panic I'd never seen in him before. Not during the '08 crash, not even during the lawsuit with the Bransons. You can't enforce this. We're Blake & Company. You don't get to. Actually, I do, I said, pulling out my tablet. It's all here. You signed off on everything, your legal team, that is. Your CFO, he had no idea I was behind the purchase. Funny what you miss when you assume someone's beneath you. The head table had gone dead silent. The Langfords stared like they'd witnessed a corporate assassination. In many ways, they had. You think this is revenge? Dad spat. You humiliated us. No, Dad, I said. This is real estate. I looked around the table, taking in the stunned faces, the shattered illusions. For years, I had been the cautionary tale. The failed daughter. The cautionary whisper in country club circles. And now I was their landlord. Andrew stared into his phone, then looked up. This article says V. Holdings controls 200 buildings in Manhattan. Correct. 50 luxury restaurants. 63 now. His eyes were wide. You have a net worth of $8.2 billion, give or take, I finished for him. Depends on the market. My mother let out a soft whimper and reached for her water glass with shaking hands. But, what about your little rental units? She said weakly. Still have them, I replied. They're stacked across 6 skyscrapers and 2 hotel chains. You know the hair salon you frequent on 5th Avenue? Mine. The gym you belong to? Mine. The entire block around your favorite brunch spot? Mine. A low, strangled noise escaped my father's throat. You were supposed to be grateful, I offered. Obedient. Quiet. I tried that. But you only saw me as a failure unless I played by your rules. Another buzz on my phone. V. Holdings to rebrand Blake Tower. Name changed to Venture One. Live footage scheduled at 10 p.m. I smiled. Oh, I added, you might want to step outside soon. The signage crew is already in position. The Blake name comes down in 15 minutes. You can't do that, Andrew barked. That name means something. It meant everything to me once, I said, rising from my chair. But now, I own it. And I've decided it doesn't belong on the skyline anymore. Vanessa, my father said, desperation rising in his voice, we can negotiate. You don't have to do this. But I want to, I said simply. The waiter returned again, this time with a chilled plate of Wagyu, served cold, just as mine had been earlier. He set it in front of Andrew with the same polite nod. From the chef, he said. Prepared the Blake family way. Andrew glared at it, jaw twitching. I turned to him. You know what they say, Andrew. Revenge, like real estate, is best served cold. 9:45 p.m. The Blake family was unraveling before my eyes. Andrew sat rigid, his cold wagyu untouched, the color draining from his face. My father, normally a commanding presence in any room, stared blankly at the lease documents as though sheer will could rewrite the clauses. My mother's silence was the loudest of all. No cutting remarks, no scolding glances, just the tight grip on her pearls and the occasional glance at her phone as headline after headline flashed across the screen. Vanessa Blake acquires Blake Tower in stealth $400 million deal. Blake & Company, real estate now tenants under former, failure, daughter. V. Holdings revealed. Billionaire Vanessa Blake controls 60% of Midtown commercial properties. I pushed back my chair. The soft scrape of metal against marble was the only sound louder than the awkward silence that had overtaken the grand pavilion. Shall we step out? I said, gesturing to the private terrace. Why? My father asked warily, rising. To watch, I said simply. We walked together, a fractured procession of family and disbelief. The Langfords and half the restaurant followed, sensing a spectacle. The terrace offered a perfect view of Blake Tower, the iconic 45-story glass structure that had once been the pride of our family. It gleamed in the night, a monument to decades of dominance. And now, it was mine. At precisely 10 p.m., the first spotlight hit the building's crown. The V of Blake Tower flickered, then began its slow descent, guided by a mechanical arm and a construction crew suspended by cranes. My father's hand shot out, gripping the railing. No, he breathed. You wouldn't. I would, I said. And I did. The next letter came. Down. L. You've humiliated this family, Andrew hissed. No, I said coolly. I revealed the truth. You just assumed I had nothing to show. A. K. E. The full name was halfway gone now, the skyline literally being rewritten in real time. I built that tower, my father snapped, fury rising like a tide. Brick by brick, you can't just erase that. I'm not erasing it, I replied. I'm upgrading it. On cue, a new crane began lifting letters into place on the opposite side. The glowing chrome pieces shimmered under the floodlights as they ascended slowly into position. V. E. N. T. U. R. E. O. N. E. The new name gleamed against the Manhattan sky. Venture 1, my company's new headquarters and a statement to the city. Andrew backed away from the railing, staring at the display like it was some twisted hallucination. You actually did it. You planned this. For years, I said. While you laughed at my little properties, my risky flips. Every cold dinner, every snide comment, every birthday I spent at the kids' table, I was buying your world. Quietly, legally, completely, a man in a suit approached, clipboard in hand. Ms. Blake, the rebranding team has confirmed the signage replacement is complete. Would you like to livestream the reveal? Already is, I replied with a smile, pointing to the red recording light on one of the nearby news drones circling the building. And the views are climbing fast. My mother finally found her voice. Vanessa, this is cruel. No, I said, turning to her. What was cruel was how you all treated me. I was never good enough. Never invited to speak at the galas. Always the last to know. Always the least respected at family meetings. But somehow I was good enough to mock. Her face flushed with a mixture of shame and disbelief. The final letter of Blake hit the pavement below with a dull, definitive thud. It was symbolic, but also completely legal. The name removal had been signed off by the city and building authorities last week. You used our own attorneys, Andrew muttered. You tricked them. I offered a deal, I corrected. They never asked who was behind the offer. They just saw the money. You think this makes you powerful? My father snapped. It just makes you vindictive. No, Dad, I said, looking him directly in the eye. It makes me capable. A second set of headlines pinged across my phone. Breaking. Blake Tower officially renamed, Venture 1. Tenants to remain under new lease agreements. Vanessa Blake appoints new leadership. Oh, I said casually, I've reassigned the offices too. Andrew, you'll be moving to the sublevel next to maintenance. Better view of the bike racks. His face turned the color of raw steak. Dad clenched his fists. And what about me? I think a part-time advisory role in mailroom logistics would be fitting, I said. You always said I should start small. A hush fell over the group as I turned toward the cameras now focused on me. They underestimated me, I said aloud. They called me soft, weak, a failure. But what they didn't understand was that I wasn't trying to impress them. I was building something bigger. Something permanent. The media had picked up every word. I turned back toward the building, now fully rebranded with the shining new name, Venture One. This is just the beginning, I said. The Blake name built a foundation. I built the empire. And for the first time in my life, my family had nothing to say. By the time Evelyn Carter stepped off the private elevator onto the top floor of Crestview Holdings, the air had changed. Gone was the overlooked assistant who had once fetched coffee and quietly slipped into meetings unnoticed. In her place stood a woman with poise sharpened by betrayal and rebuilt by strategy, a woman who now controlled the very empire that had dismissed her. Evelyn's entrance into the executive boardroom sent ripples through the gathered crowd. Directors turned, eyes widening as they registered the woman in the navy silk dress, tailored to precision. Her heels echoed against the marble like a countdown. Alan, seated at the head of the long table, froze mid-sentence. "Who let the assistant in?" barked Gregory Shaw, one of the older board members. Evelyn's smile was calm, almost amused. "I believe you mean the majority shareholder." The room fell silent. Alan's face turned red. "What kind of game is this?" Evelyn handed a thick leather folder to the legal counsel. "No game, just facts. Over the last 3 years, I acquired shares through Shell Ventures, private purchases, and buybacks your team didn't even notice. Crestview Holdings now belongs, mostly, to ME." She turned to the stunned board. "I now own 52.4% of the company." Gasps broke out. Alan shot up from his chair. "That's impossible. You underestimated the assistant, remember?" Evelyn said, voice like ice. "You made me invisible long enough to walk right past your defenses." Gregory sputtered, "There's no way the board will support this." "Oh, I think they will," Evelyn said, gesturing toward the door. In walked Samuel, the CFO who had once whispered warnings to her in passing. Behind him were Priya, the youngest director, and even Kenneth Lauer, Alan's longtime ally. Samuel spoke first. "I've reviewed her acquisitions. They're legitimate. She owns controlling interest now. We're with her." Alan's voice cracked. "You traitors." "No, Alan," Kenneth cut in. "We're realists. And frankly, Evelyn's leadership is the only thing that can save this company from the scandal you buried." Evelyn raised a brow. "Oh, should we discuss the offshore funds or the manipulated revenue charts?" Alan lunged across the table, furious, but Gregory pulled him back. "You'll never get away with this," Alan hissed. "You're just an assistant." Evelyn stepped closer, lowering her voice just enough. "You handed me the keys every time you sent me out of the room, every time you dismissed me. I was listening, learning, plotting." The boardroom screen lit up with a slide. "Proposal for corporate transition, CEO Evelyn Carter." She continued, "I've filed a motion for Alan's removal due to breach of fiduciary duty. The board vote is scheduled for now." Alan glared around the table, seeking any ally. One by one, hands rose in favor of the motion, including Gregory's. The silence afterward was thick with disbelief. Alan slumped in his chair, eyes blank. Evelyn looked at him, no longer with resentment, but with finality. "You never noticed, Alan. That was your fatal mistake. You trained me better than you realized." She turned to the others. "There's work to be done. We clean the books, rebuild investor confidence, and restore integrity. Crestview deserves better than fear-driven leadership." As the room began to buzz with motion, Evelyn stepped out onto the executive balcony, the skyline of the city glittering before her. It had taken years of silent sacrifice and strategic patience, but she had finally reclaimed her power. A voice called from behind. It was Priya, holding a flute of champagne. "To think they treated you like background noise." Evelyn smiled, watching the sun set beyond the high rises. Funny how invisible people can become the loudest storm. And the storm had only just begun. The Crestview Foundation Gala was always the event of the year, an opulent display of power and wealth hosted annually at the Metropolitan Grand. It had once been Alan Carter's stage to flaunt his influence. But this year, everything was different. This year, the spotlight belonged to Evelyn. She descended the grand staircase slowly, every movement deliberate. Dressed in a custom midnight blue gown that shimmered like authority itself, she didn't need to announce herself. Eyes turned on instinct. Murmurs followed in her wake. "That's her. The new CEO. I heard she was Alan's assistant." She smiled faintly. Let them wonder. At the base of the stairs stood her former fiancé, Daniel, clutching a champagne glass he no longer seemed so confident holding. Next to him, Claudia, the woman he left Evelyn for, tightened her grip on his arm as if Evelyn's presence threatened to unravel everything. Evelyn didn't flinch. She walked straight past them with all the grace of someone who had already won. Tonight's program had saved the biggest announcement for last, the formal introduction of Crestview Holdings' new leadership and its strategic redirection. The lights dimmed, and the MC took the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome, Ms. Evelyn Carter, CEO of Crestview Holdings. A standing ovation erupted, not for Alan, not for legacy, but for the woman they had all once overlooked. Evelyn stepped to the podium, her voice poised, steady. When I first joined Crestview, she began, I was told to stay quiet, take notes, and stay out of the way. I did exactly that, and while I was silent, I watched everything. She paused, letting the weight settle. I watched men take credit for my ideas. I watched my own uncle mock me in boardrooms. I watched my fiancé walk away because he thought I would never be enough. And then, I watched them all underestimate me. She held up a small black folder. 3 years ago, I started building something in secret, my own network, my own stake, my own future. As of last month, I became the majority shareholder and CEO of Crestview Holdings. The crowd erupted again. Flashes from cameras flickered like fireworks. But Evelyn wasn't done. I want to personally thank Mr. Alan Carter, who taught me the most important business lesson of all: silence is power, until it's time to speak. Gasps rippled through the crowd as Alan, seated at the edge of the VIP section, tried to slip away. Before you go, Alan, Evelyn said coolly, I've instructed the press to receive copies of our internal audit findings, years of mismanaged funds and off-the-book deals. You'll have your moment in the spotlight after all. He froze mid-step, then her eyes found Daniel's across the room. And to those who walked away when they thought I was worthless, thank you. You reminded me to stop seeking approval from people too small to understand my worth. Daniel's face flushed. Claudia's smile vanished. Evelyn stepped back from the podium to thunderous applause. She didn't need revenge to come from cruelty. Her victory was clean, sharp, and undeniable. As the orchestra swelled behind her, Priya approached with a glass of champagne. To new beginnings, she said. Evelyn clinked her glass and replied, to never being invisible again. She looked out across the glittering ballroom, the very room where they once whispered about her like she didn't belong. Now, they couldn't stop saying her name. Evelyn Carter, CEO, visionary, storm, and in the silence between applause, her voice echoed loudest of all.